This is really a privilege and an honor for me. It's hard to know what to say to people, as I think I have probably the strangest job in the world. I spend most of my time in difficult places. I spend quite a good deal of time alone. Oftentimes I'll go a couple months without speaking English or speaking very broken English, to the point where people ask me what languages I speak, and I say none anymore because I don't even speak English very well at this point because I have such long gaps between speaking it. But my job has been a real privilege and a gift, mainly because I feel like I've been able to show people in Western countries what others go through in developing countries and in regions of conflict, crisis, and disasters. And that's been really something that's been amazingly humbling and difficult and rewarding and just fascinating. Because I spend so much time alone in bizarre places, you can imagine that it's pretty bizarre to all of a sudden be standing on a stage with bright lights and looking out at a bunch of people. So because of that, I like to write my thoughts down. I think I speak a little better when my thoughts are on paper, so I'd like to share with you a few things that I think are important. The most common question that I'm asked is, what is it really like out there? What is it really like in Iraq? What was it like during the tsunami? Or what was it like to watch people suffer on a daily basis? It's a question I never quite know how to answer. The expected answer, I believe, is a simile. Iraq is like the movie Platoon, and so on. But to give such a simple answer would be to simplify a subject that's far too complicated. The reality is that there's no way to explain to someone what an experience is like when that person has no frame of reference, no baseline to begin to understand the answer that I would give. I don't mean that as an insult. I truly believe that certain things cannot be summed up with words or even images. Certain things just contain far too much depth to be simplified in a two-dimensional medium. My goal as a photographer is to bring people as close to what I see and experience as I possibly can, without that individual ever having to leave their home. It is my job to not only portray the details of a scene, but to try to capture the emotion of a scene. While I cannot capture the sounds and smells and tactile details of an event with my camera, I can capture emotion, and I can do my best to portray the reality of what I witness. Photography has the ability to put a face on issues which seem far distant from the day-to-day reality of most of the world. Photography can define what is meant when the news casually mentions the number of injured after the number of dead. While political figures and news organizations give us one side of a story, photographers often tell us another. Photographs have the ability to not only record historical events, but to sway the beliefs and emotions of those who have control over such events. Photographs have raised countless dollars for humanitarian relief and brought to light subjects that lay hidden in darkness. War photography, which is by nature anti-war photography, helped to change popular opinion during the Vietnam War and has gone a long way to stress diplomatic resolution over conflict. Malcolm Brown's photograph of a Buddhist monk burning himself on the streets of Saigon, Thomas Franklin's photo of firefighters raising the flag in the rubble of Ground Zero, and Kevin Carter's photograph of a young boy watched by a vulture suffering from starvation in Sudan. Photography gives people the ability to communicate with those who speak different languages. It gives a voice to people who would otherwise have no voice and provides a direct window into lives which most of us could not even begin to imagine. What photography cannot do, at least the work of a single photographer, is capture the true scope of what is going on in the world today. Capturing the story of one AIDS patient or one soldier leaves the stories of thousands more untold. Although some believe that a picture cannot lie, I try to point out that it's hard to tell the whole story in 1/60th of a second. Photography and photojournalism are imperfect, much like the individuals it sets out to document and those of us who do the documenting. Even with its imperfections, the still image can capture life in a way that television, radio, and the written word cannot. The most iconic images in history are burned into our consciousness one frame at a time. Unfortunately, the press has become an entertainment industry, and it's important to remember that the world does not revolve for the sole purpose of entertaining us. As newsrooms and massive photo agencies dictate what news is distributed based on what sells the most product, humanity suffers. While we may not want to see a mother holding her dead baby on the cover of the paper we set on our breakfast table, it's safe to say that the mother has been brought more pain from the situation than we have. While certain subjects feel as far from us as the countries they occur in, it's important not to forget that we're all connected, and the mesh that separates what happens from others from what happens to us grows thinner every day. We need only look at the events of September 11th for proof. We pay a price for our actions, and much like credit, we pay the highest price for inaction. Today, I'd like to take you on a visual journey. This journey will take you through nearly 10 years, dozens of countries, and some of the worst conflict and humanitarian crises in recent history. Starting most recently and working backwards, you will see images from the most dangerous and underreported time in both the Iraq and Afghanistan conflicts. You will see images I captured in the aftermath of a suicide bombing that tore apart the lives of more than 70 people, including high-ranking U.S. and Iraqi military. These controversial images led to me being held in detention by my own government in Fallujah. After being released, I spent the next several years under threat of death from those who felt that these images of war were not patriotic. As a war photographer, I firmly believe that it is my duty to show all sides of war, including and especially its horrors. In addition to the controversial work, you will see life from the perspective of the men and women in arms, as well as the locals who find themselves trapped in a bloody and hopeless situation. This intimate look inside these two countries makes it easy to see why so many have chosen to flee. Next, we travel to Haiti. Just days after the earthquake, I had been working there just weeks before the earthquake struck, and I was able to re-enter to document the aftermath. The devastation and pain caused to a country that was so poor that before the earthquake, I found neighborhoods in which residents ate cakes made out of sand was absolutely horrific. I continue to show these photos, even years later, because I know the situation there is still desperate, and I want to remind people what it looks like, even now. From there, we look at Gaza and the West Bank of Palestine. We look into local hospitals 5 months after U.S. and Israeli-imposed sanctions cut off all medical aid and supplies from entering the country. We will see what happens to newborn children when they're delivered by doctors who cannot afford to wash their hands with soap before delivering the babies. We will also see the toll that years of war has taken on the people, their environment, and their culture. Gaza is unique. It's a country populated with refugees, and in many ways, it's like a prison camp. There's no way in or out of Gaza if you're Palestinian. Where there's hope for Iraqis and Afghans to search out new lives and flee for their own safety, most Palestinians are not left with this option. Gaza is, in many ways, the worst of both worlds. Residents are refugees, many are unable to find work or even basic necessities. Digging tunnels through to Egypt has become one of the few pipelines for Gazans to get supplies. Thousands live in camps, including Beach Camp, the world's longest standing refugee camp. Others are simply homeless. All of this, and still in the center of the conflict, watching friends and family members die with no chance for escape. Next, we look at Lebanon after the 34-day summer war. We see the effects of cluster bomb munitions and life in both Beirut and the south of the country in the wake of the war. The tsunami is seen both from Thailand and Sri Lanka, and the Asian earthquake from deep within the Kashmir Valley in Pakistan.
After a brief while working for the Red Cross, Miller realized that this job was what he called muddied with red tape and misuse of resources. He realized then that he should pick up his camera and document what he's been seeing.
We chose the quote, "I've always wanted my photographs to be a voice for the oppressed, a voice for the people who didn't have a voice," because Miller focuses on children in many of his photos. Children are directly affected in war-torn and poor countries, but they are not given an opportunity to have a voice. This is because many are too young to fully understand what is going on, so they just have to suffer through the destruction and poverty around them. By Miller choosing to take photos of these children, he is giving them their voice back.
Zoriah Miller was largely untrained. He took some courses in high school and college on photography, but he largely learned through online resources and mentors, whom he owes a great deal. Some of Miller's favorite photojournalists are Salgado, Nakve, and Vitali. Each of these photographers has their own influence on Zoriah Miller's photographs. The way the eyes of many of his subjects meets those of the audience is similar to Salgado's work, and his close proximity to his subjects is resemblant to the work of Nakve.
In an interview, Miller said he chooses to let his photographs tell the messages he wants to convey by letting them speak for themselves because they do a better job than he ever could. Tom Stoddard once said, "I am close. I like to get close. I like to see their faces, into their eyes, and therefore into their soul." This made us think of Miller's photographs because they are so up close and personal. The angles Miller chooses to use in his photographs help his audience see and somewhat feel the emotion his subjects are showing, whether it is happiness or sadness. Some of Miller's photographs we chose to represent come from work he's done in Iraq, Gaza, Afghanistan, Lebanon, and people impacted by an Asian earthquake. All of these pictures come from one project called Diaries of a Shooter. The project focuses on critical social and humanitarian issues in these areas.
In an interview, Miller is asked that journalists are often told that they must be impartial. Is this possible for you as a war photographer? He replies, "I believe that you absolutely must be emotionally invested in your work If you don't care about what you are doing, it shows in your work. It is very important to keep an open mind about things and be willing to change your opinions, but it is also important to follow your heart and tell stories in a personal and emotional way.
Although these kids live through things some of us can never imagine, they still try to live a normal life. And the pictures of them riding tricycles and going to carnivals can show a little light in their everyday darkness.